In about 5 minutes, we shall be returning to Manchester and Birmingham for more Daytime UK with Afternoon.
From the studios of ITN, the early evening news with Trevor MacDonald.
Good evening. The body of the Princess of Wales is at this moment being flown home from Paris in a last poignant journey with her former husband, Prince Charles. At 10 minutes past 5 British time this afternoon, her coffin, draped in the royal standard, was carried from the hospital in eastern Paris where she died early today after an horrific crash. The nation and the world woke up to mourn. And in death, Diana's wish to be known as the Queen of Hearts seems to have been achieved. Prime Minister Tony Blair said, "She was the people's princess and will remain in our hearts forever." Our foreign news correspondent Paul Davies reports from Paris.
Accorded a guard of honour by soldiers from the French Presidential Guard, the body of Diana, Princess of Wales, was carried from the hospital just over an hour ago. The Prince of Wales had travelled to Paris to accompany the body of his former wife on the journey back to London. There were condolences from President and Mrs. Chirac before the cortege left the hospital Salpêtrière to begin the sad final journey home. The route from the hospital lined with people who'd waited for hours to pay their last respects. Why it happened, how it happened, so many questions remain unanswered. But this was the barely recognisable Mercedes limousine in which the Princess of Wales and her companion, Dodi Fayed, were being driven back to his house in Paris last night. Witnesses have said the car was being pursued by photographers riding motorcycles. What is certain is that as he entered this tunnel alongside the River Seine, the driver lost control. The car span, overturned and hit a pillar. Dodi Fayed died instantly in the back seat. The driver was also killed. The princess, who'd been sitting alongside Dodi Fayed, suffered terrible chest injuries. At first, ambulance crews managed to keep her alive, but her heart had stopped beating by the time she arrived at the hospital. For 2 hours, surgeons fought to restart her heart. At 4 a.m. Paris time, they admitted defeat. Britain's ambassador had been at her bedside.
The Princess of Wales fills us all with deep shock and with deep grief. And our thoughts and our prayers are with her family and her friends.
At the scene of the accident, French police officers examined motorcycles allegedly used by photographers to chase the princess's car. The men who'd been riding them are still being held for questioning. The princess and Dodi Fayed had dined at the Ritz Hotel owned by the Al Fayed family. This was the route their driver took to escape the photographer's attention. As the road enters the tunnel, there's a short bend and a dip. This is where he lost control.
The car was just travelling at such speed, and it was almost as if it was in too high a gear. It really, really was tearing away. I don't know, maybe it was doing at least 80, maybe 100 miles an hour.
This morning, with the underpass reopened to traffic, police were still trying to piece together the last moments of what had been a romantic holiday for the princess and her friend. At the hospital Salpêtrière, hundreds of ordinary people have been leaving flowers in memory of the princess.
Oh, Diana, why?
This distraught woman said the Princess of Wales had been her heroine ever since the day they'd met while she was on an exchange visit working at a charity in South London. The French police have spent the day questioning the 7 photographers detained near the scene of the accident. Unofficially, we've been told at least 4 of them could face charges. The authorities are treating the 3 deaths as a case of possible manslaughter. Paul Davies, ITN, Paris.
The Queen and the Prince of Wales were woken in the early hours of the morning at Balmoral to be told the news. Later, they attended a church service there, accompanied by Prince William and Prince Harry. David Rose reports from Balmoral.
Balmoral Castle, where sometime around 4 this morning, the heir to the throne had to wake his 2 sons and break the news that their beloved mother was dead. 7 hours later, 3 limousines swept down the drive. Prince Charles and William and Harry were in the second car, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh in the last. They crossed the main road and drove up the hill under the trees to Crathy Church. In the church, the service never mentioned Princess Diana by name, but the minister did offer prayers for all those whose lives had been darkened by tragedy and grief. Then, after an hour of worship, the cars returned, the two young princes sitting on either side of their father in the back of the car. A few minutes later, as a small crowd watched, Prince Charles left at the wheel of the first of two cars heading for Aberdeen Airport. He transferred to a plane of the Royal Squadron, which left immediately for Paris. The Prince would have 3 hours to prepare himself for what lay ahead. This evening, it's looking increasingly unlikely that any other member of the royal family will leave. Most of the police and special branch have gone, and Balmoral Castle does offer considerable privacy. David Rose, ITN, at Balmoral.
As we indicated, the Prime Minister Tony Blair led the tributes to Princess Diana today. He described her as wonderful, warm and compassionate, and said she'd be remembered with the deepest affection and love. President Clinton said he'd been profoundly saddened by the news of her death and added that she'd had a tremendous influence in advancing those causes for which she fought. Andrew Simmons reports.
The Prime Minister had spoken amidst the disbelief and shock which was sweeping Britain, expressing the depth of sadness felt by so many.
I feel like everyone else in this country today, utterly devastated. Our thoughts and prayers are with Princess Diana's family, in particular her two sons, the two boys. Our hearts go out to them. We are today a nation in Britain in a state of shock.
She was a unique figure. She was a very lively and attractive individual, but also she was a unique public figure. And I think we should all recognize this morning that she did a great deal of good. We should pay tribute to the tremendous work that she did.
Our thoughts and our prayers and our first considerations must be for her family, the Prince of Wales, her wider family. Beyond that, she brought light and compassion to our life and much else as well, and that light has now gone out.
President Clinton, on holiday in Massachusetts, said the whole of America sent its condolences to Britain.
We liked her very much. We admired her work for children, for people with AIDS, for the cause of ending the scourge of landmines in the world, and for her love for her children, William and Harry. And I know that this is a very difficult time for millions of people in the United Kingdom who are deeply shocked and grieving.
And the painful start of that grieving was signalled by the Union flag flying at half-mast throughout Britain, above Westminster Abbey, at Sandringham, in country parishes such as this one in Worcestershire. Special services were held by all denominations. The Archbishop of Canterbury was in Manchester. He lit a candle for the Princess of Wales.
She was loved by so many people, and I think there was in this remarkable, young, very attractive woman a combination of the ordinary and the extraordinary. The ordinary is the way in which she seems so like us.
One of many thoughts shared by millions from all generations on this solemn Sunday. Andrew Simmons, ITN.
People began paying their respects to the princess as soon as they heard the shocking news of her death. Thousands of mourners have been visiting her home, Kensington Palace, and the other royal palaces throughout the day to lay flowers and to express their grief at her passing. Chris Roberts has our report.
Diana was the people's princess, and people across the nation have spent today openly mourning her death. Buckingham Palace became the focus point for an outpouring of grief mixed with disbelief that Diana was dead.
Just shock. You know, you just can't believe it, can you? I can't believe it now even, you know.
It was a great shock when we heard that she died. Sort of unbelievable. And I think everybody's walking around in sort of a trance.
The scene was mirrored at the princess's London home, Kensington Palace. The pavement a sea of colour, but the mood one of dark depression.
I mean, we're the general public. I'm just, you know, it's just heartbreaking how her kids must be feeling right now.
She was a great lady. The world will never be the same without her again.
In Northern Ireland, as in so many parts of Britain, people remembered Diana in their prayers, many feeling as if they'd lost a member of their own family.
Everyone felt that as if they knew her, and I think it will come as a sort of a personal tragedy to all of the nation.
And all of the nation mourned as it tries to come to terms with today's tragedy.
I mean, there wasn't a bad thing about her, really, was there? She was just a nice lady.
The Princess of Wales touched the hearts of so many Britons, and it's clear today's nationwide grief won't be gone tomorrow. Chris Roberts, ITN.
Princess Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, said today that people who had paid for intrusive and exploitative pictures of his sister now have her blood on their hands. To compound the Earl Spencer's observations, there are reports this evening that photographers are now trying to sell pictures of Princess Diana in the wreckage of the crash in which she died. Here's our Home Affairs editor, Jennifer Nadel.
Besieged and pursued by photographers wherever she went, tonight the focus is firmly on the press and broadcasters, with the princess's own brother accusing them of complicity in her death.
I always believed the press would kill her in the end. But not even I could imagine that they would take such a direct hand in her death, as seems to be the case. It would appear that every proprietor and editor of every publication that has paid for intrusive and exploitative photographs of her, encouraging greedy and ruthless individuals to risk everything in pursuit of Diana's image, has blood on his hands today.
Similar sentiments were expressed on behalf of the Al Fayeds.
Mr. Al Fayed believes that this appalling tragedy would never have happened but for the attentions of these people who I suppose we shall have to call photographers. It was quite appalling what happened.
Moves to toughen the law were recently rejected. The government has so far favoured self-regulation.
I think there has been concern in Britain, in the press and the media, that there should be a line drawn and that it should be drawn by a responsible press and by responsible media, rather than having it drawn for them by others.
Many newspaper editors believe that those who court publicity shouldn't then be able to shun it.
The story had huge market potential in every country in the world. Even if you banned it in one country, the market would still be sufficiently great to ensure that the harassment continued.
Tonight there were reports from the States that pictures of the fatal crash were being offered for sale, a test perhaps of whether press attitudes have changed. Jennifer Nadel, ITN.
And in the last few minutes, the coffin containing the body of the Princess of Wales has been put on board a plane in Paris, bound for Britain. A guard of honour stood by as the coffin was removed from the hearse covered by the royal standard. 8 servicemen from the Royal Air Force carried it towards the plane as French soldiers stood to attention. And our correspondent Robert Hall is in Paris now. Robert, we understand that a security detail who was in the car in which the princess died is in hospital without life-threatening injuries, and so he may be able to give a fuller picture of what went on in the early hours of this morning.
Yes, indeed he may. We've been getting a bit more detail about Trevor Rhys-Jones. He's a bodyguard employed by the Al Fayed family who was travelling in the front of that vehicle. He has, as you say, serious injuries, serious facial injuries. He's in intensive care. His family are with him, but no, he's not on the danger list. He may be able to give more detail about what has become a rather confused incident. We've got these reports, as you've heard, of press photographers on motorbikes, either behind or around that car. Other witnesses say they saw no bikes. We may not know any more until the French police either prefer charges or issue a further statement.
Robert, what about those people who we understand earlier today were arrested and are still being held in connection with this incident, those photographers on motorbikes?
Well, that's right. There were 7 photographers altogether, 6 French photographers, 1 Macedonian. They were questioned throughout the day. Reports this afternoon suggested that 3 of them had been released, 4 were still being held. Even if the French don't prefer charges of either involuntary manslaughter or manslaughter, there is a charge under a sort of so-called Good Samaritan law, where people can actually be indicted for failing to help people in danger. So they may not be out of danger yet.
Robert Hall in Paris, thank you very much. Princess Diana's most recent high-profile cause was, of course, her crusade to rid the world of landmines. It was a role which sometimes brought her into conflict with politicians, but the princess always insisted that her interest was purely humanitarian. Our Africa correspondent Steve Scott was in Angola when the princess visited that country.
Dressed down and ready for work, a princess swapping glamour for a new hands-on approach to her charity work. In January, she chose war-ravaged Angola to launch this fresh image and put her face behind the Red Cross landmines campaign. The victims she met had no idea who she was. They were just glad somebody was taking notice. They found her visit uplifting, and where others would have been embarrassed, the princess was completely at ease with the serious injuries confronting her. She was, though, quite clearly moved by many of the tragic stories she listened to. At the time, the princess described the trip as humbling, with the effect of hardening her stance against anti-personnel mines. Her visit made headlines worldwide, but also sparked criticism from some British MPs who blamed her for meddling in politics. Somewhat annoyed, the princess replied she was not a politician, but a humanitarian, always had been, always would be. The man who accompanied her in Angola said today her magic had an extraordinary effect.
When the Princess of Wales became involved, suddenly the interest escalated. Journalists who wrote articles about things nothing to do with landmines had to suddenly swat up on landmine issues and learn about the subject, get to know it, and report it. And we saw the reporting of landmines in some of the most obscure journals in the world.
Earlier this month, she took her campaign to Bosnia, taking time to talk to those, many of them children, whose lives have been shattered by the war there. As always, focusing on the youngsters to help publicise the devastation mines have caused and the threat they still pose. The princess knew she'd be followed wherever she went, so she decided to turn that to the advantage of tens of thousands across the world who are in no position to help themselves. Steve Scott, ITN.
Our correspondent Harry Smith is at Buckingham Palace. Harry, as we said, the body of the princess is on its way back to Britain now. What information can you give us about the funeral arrangements?
Well, there's been no announcement as yet. I'm told that there might be an announcement later tonight, more likely tomorrow. The main question, of course, is what kind of funeral the princess will be given. Normally, members of the royal family would have a full state funeral, but of course the Princess of Wales lost her title, Her Royal Highness, but the royal family must be acutely aware, as are most people in this country, that many people will want to pay their tribute to the princess. I'm told that the thinking at the moment seems to be that she will be given a national funeral, which might be a state funeral in all but name. Of course, then that could happen towards the end of next week, perhaps Friday. More likely, however, I'm told that the week after. That there is still, of course, the question of where she'll be buried. Normally, members of the royal family would be interred at St George's Chapel, Windsor. She could, however, be buried at the family home in Northamptonshire. But I think we've been given a very strong signal. It was a royal standard which was draped over her coffin as it left France. I think that's a clear indication that she will be given the full dignitary of a member of the royal family.
So, Harry, as you said, the possibility now of a funeral next week. Any indication of what happens between the arrival of the princess's body and the funeral?
I'm told it will arrive shortly at RAF Northolt. It'll then be taken, it'll arrive by plane, it'll then be taken to a private chapel. Thereafter, we've been given no indication of what will happen. As I say, we are waiting for word from Buckingham Palace. There is, as yet, no official announcement.
Harry Smith, Buckingham Palace, thank you very much. And that's the early evening news on the day the nation mourns the death of the Princess of Wales. I'll be back at 9 o'clock this evening with a special programme, and we'll be going back to the continuous news team for more live coverage shortly. But first, Lauren Taylor looks back at the life of Diana, Princess of Wales.
It was in February 1981 that a shy Lady Diana Spencer was officially engaged to Prince Charles. It was the start of a royal career that turned her into one of the most famous women in the world. Although she was the daughter of an aristocrat, her marriage to Prince Charles transformed her life. There was even the prospect she might one day be queen. During a ceremony that was watched all over the world, Diana's youth and beauty shone out, capturing the hearts of the nation and beyond. Her marriage appeared initially to be going well, with a first son, Prince William, born in 1982. But the pressure of such a high-profile role was beginning to show, and there were rumours she was suffering from anorexia nervosa, rumours at that time denied by the palace. In 1984, a second son, Prince Harry, was born. Always under the public eye, Diana immersed herself in charity work, notably with AIDS victims, helping to destigmatise the illness. But her marriage was beginning to fall apart, and the couple separated. Although Diana vowed to continue her charity work, a series of scandals followed. The final straw came when a paper published pictures of her working out in a gym. She'd had enough.
I was not aware of how overwhelming that attention would become, nor the extent to which it would affect both my public duties and my personal life in a manner that's been hard to bear.
The last few years of the marriage were marred by very public admissions of marital unhappiness. First, Prince Charles admitted on television he'd been unfaithful. Then came Diana's panorama programme.
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
But the interview also allowed her to explain what she wanted to be.
I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts, in people's hearts. But I don't see myself being queen of this country. I'd like to be an ambassador for this country. I'd like to represent this country abroad. As I have all this media interest, let's not just sit in this country and be battered by it. Let's take them, these people, out and to represent this country and the good qualities of it abroad.
Since her divorce in August 1996, Diana had increasingly succeeded in that role of international ambassador for good causes. Here she walked through a field of landmines in Angola to publicise their dangers. Leading humanitarian figures recognised her ability to generate support for previously obscure issues. Her recent friendship with Dodi Al-Fayed brought her companionship, but kept her in the headlines too. In recent months, Diana appeared to have found happiness again, her charm and charisma as ever winning over those who met her. Lauren Taylor, ITN.
Good evening. Nicholas Owen, our royal correspondent, and I are staying on the air in place of the scheduled programmes to bring you live coverage of the return to Britain of the body of Diana, Princess of Wales. Prince Charles, who's accompanying the body, is expected to touch down in his aircraft at London's RAF Northolt within the next half an hour. Our reporter, Eric McInnes, is there now. Eric, I understand that the Prime Minister, Mr Blair, has already arrived there.
Yes, the Prime Minister arrived here about half an hour ago, Dermot. In fact, he's actually over on the apron there, talking to some of the press, I believe. He's waiting for the Princess's aircraft to arrive. I spoke to Buckingham Palace officials earlier, and they gave us the schedule of what will happen here. At 7 o'clock, a BAE 146 aircraft called the Royal Scot of the Queen's Flight will touch down carrying the body of Diana, Princess of Wales. On board will be her 2 sisters and, of course, her former husband, the Prince of Wales. The Prime Minister will meet the group with the Defence Secretary will also be with them. Then the coffin will be brought off by 8 coffin bearers and 3 escorts of the Queen's Colour Squadron. They will move silently towards the front of the plane where the coffin will be placed into the hearse. Buckingham Palace officials are saying that Princess Diana is being afforded the full ceremonials here, as is befitting a full member of the royal family. She no longer has the HRH moniker, but they're saying that she will have the full ceremonials here. There will be a small ceremony on the apron before the body is taken away in the hearse to a private mortuary somewhere in London.
Eric, quite a gathering there behind you. Any idea who else is there?
Sorry, I didn't hear you there, Dermot.
Any idea who else is in that crowd behind you?
Well, there's all the media, the assembled media there. The Prime Minister is there, the Defence Secretary is there, the Lord Chamberlain is there, the Lord Lieutenant of London is there. They are the official welcoming committee, and they'll be waiting for the aircraft. As I said, it should be landing here at about 7 o'clock this evening.
OK, Eric, thank you very much indeed. We will, of course, be returning to Northolt to bring you live coverage of that event. Well, the plane carrying the body of the Princess of Wales is in the air at the moment. It took off from Paris with Prince Charles on board a short while ago. We will be bringing you some pictures of that very shortly, but first let's go to our royal correspondent, Nicholas Owen. Nicholas, I suppose a sense of expectation, a sense of dreaded expectation.
Yes, absolutely. This plane is going to bring back just about the saddest cargo that's imaginable to this country, and then you know, what would everybody's feelings? I don't think anybody's quite prepared for how this is going to turn out. Michael Brunson, our political editor, he's with us too here, and he was saying earlier, wasn't he, that you know, these occasions are always extremely sombre is the word. We mustn't overuse that word. Everything's going to be a bit like that today, but certainly this will be in the next next hour or so.
Let's just have a look now. We can now see that BAE 146 from the Royal flight, taking off from Paris.
Yes, that's from Villacoublay is the name of the military air base. And away she goes, containing it, that's half an hour ago, containing the body of the princess. Away it goes, back to Britain. What a sad,
amazing picture there as it goes past the setting sun.
Yes.
And as Eric McInnes was telling us, on board Prince Charles, Lady Jane Fellows and Sarah McCorquodale, the Princess of Wales' sisters.
And of course the coffin draped with the royal standard. As Eric McInnes over at Northolt saying, this is being treated as a full royal occasion for the lady who, no longer HRH, that title she lost, but the Queen said she was to be regarded as a member of the royal family, and the events of the next week or so are going to prove, I think, that that is absolutely, fully the case.
The plane almost suspended in the air there. Well, about half an hour ago, the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, as we heard, flew into RAF Northolt to await the arrival of Prince Charles with the body of the Princess of Wales. There we have the Prime Minister's flight. He came down this afternoon from his constituency in Sedgefield, caught a flight from Teesside Airport, I believe. There is, you can just see in the distance there, Mr. Blair being greeted by a senior member of the RAF. The Defence Secretary, George Robertson, to Mr. Blair's right. This, as I say, happened about half an hour ago. Mr. Blair now waiting on the runway with the rest of the assembled party there for the arrival of the flight containing the coffin of the Princess of Wales. We are expecting that flight, as you heard, to arrive in at about 7 o'clock, give or take a few minutes.
Very onerous task this is for this
Well,
new Prime Minister. Could never have imagined
I wanted
this.
to bring in Michael Brunton, our political editor, who's sitting with us in the studio here. As Nick was saying there, Mike, 4 months into his premiership, what a job for the Prime Minister.
Yes, it's truly terrible. We've already seen and heard Mr. Blair expressing in very emotional terms this morning, not just his thoughts, but speaking as, of course, the leader of Her Majesty's government. In a sense, he does have to speak for everybody in this country, and he was saying that he was devastated. But what is uppermost in his thoughts, I can tell you, is the terrible loss of the promise that there was in what Princess Diana...
Mike, we're just getting some live pictures in from Northolt. There is the Guard of Honour assembling for the arrival of the Prince of Wales flight from Paris.
RAF men who I think will be the pallbearers, will they not?
Bareheaded.
Yes, there was 8 pallbearers were in, RAF men were in Paris to load the coffin onto the hearse from which it was taken, loaded it onto that aeroplane for that sad, sad journey to Northolt, and there is the Northolt contingent, their opposite numbers, if you like, being marched out, and they will perform the dreadful, dreadful task of carrying that coffin.
These are, of course, live pictures, yes, live pictures we're seeing.
From RAF Northolt. As we were saying earlier, this base is specially equipped to deal with royal flights, special security and so forth. It's a place that Prince Charles is very familiar with.
OK, Mike, we interrupted you there to take those live
Well, I was
pictures
just saying that what is uppermost in Mr. Blair's private thoughts, I'm told, with those that he's been speaking with during the day, is his sense of this awful, awful loss of a woman who just perhaps was beginning to find a role for herself. Of course, there was a great empathy between Mr. Blair and the Princess over this question of landmines. One of the very first things that the government did was to bring in the ban on landmines, which the previous government had decided that it didn't want to go quite that far. And so between the two of them, there was this empathy. But Mr. Blair has been talking to friends and sort of saying, look, this woman could, if that kind of thing had gone on, have been such an asset to Britain. And of course, the other thing that goes through one's mind is that Mr. Blair is a young man too, in his coming up to his mid-40s. Princess Diana at 36. The two of them, if you like, represented, did they not, a different kind of generation. Mr. Blair taking over the start of a younger generation of politicians, Princess Diana, the young figurehead, if you like, for so many people. And all of those aspirations, Mr. Blair felt, were coming forward. And so he felt that after they'd had a meeting at Chequers, not so very far from Northolt, of course, that things would go forward.
Both, of course, with 2 young sons, pretty close in age.
And we understand that when there had been those gatherings at Chequers, and of course at one of them, Prince William, I think it was, accompanied his mother to Chequers. There was a game of football, I think, that went on. Nick perhaps knows a little bit more about this than I do. And the kids were getting on like a house on fire.
I think the young Blairs and young Royals, there was a bit of a kick about, and the word was that the Blair boys won, but they're fanatic football fans, aren't they?
But it just shows of the generational thing there. Mr. Blair and the Princess, very much of that generation, who would get on easily without any great formality.
The Queen and the basic affection between the Queen and the Princess of Wales was always there, right the way through the bad times.
I think the party containing the Prime Minister is slightly to the right of the plane. You can see a few people just edging their way forward there. That's presumably the spot where the plane is going to come to its final halt. Apart from the RAF dignitaries that are there, of course the Prime Minister, we're also told that we have seen there George Robertson, the Defence Secretary, is there. The Lord Chamberlain, who's the head of the Queen's household, and the Lord Lieutenant of London. As part of royal protocol, he will be there too.
And now
that is a long shot. There's Mr. Blair, the Prime Minister, standing in the middle of that group, containing the people I just mentioned. They're coming forward now. We can just, I don't know if you just heard it there, the plane's engines were just cut. There's the very sad sight of the hearse moving forward.
That cut of engines, Michael was talking about the precision precisely 10 minutes after landing. And
there you can see the white gloves of the 3 escorts moving forward now. Shortly the steps will be brought up to the plane. The doors will open.
And of course, presumably, we shall see Prince Charles standing on the tarmac, having to watch this. We've been talking about what's going through Mr. Blair's mind. He's been waiting at Northolt, but we no doubt will now see in a minute or two Prince Charles coming from the plane.
The pallbearers advancing now. That very slow, deliberate march. Taking them towards the cargo part, I have to say that's what it is, of the plane.
There's a closer shot. Approaching the back of the plane.
The saddest duty that has ever been performed at RAF Northolt.
Those young RAF men will remember this for the rest of their lives.
We will too, Dermot.
Absolutely. Just shuffling up there, absolute precision, as you were describing, Mike.
Yes, I think what we're seeing there is what I was saying earlier about the quiet dignity of this.
There is the Prince of Wales now, and with him behind, we've moved away from it, but that was the Prince of Wales, obviously, with the sisters of the Princess.
The coffin being unloaded from another part of the plane.
And here it comes.
There we have a glimpse of it.
Roma always from them. Coffin lifted onto those broad shoulders.
Carried the short distance to the awaiting hearse.
Down smartly and the slow march about to begin. Again, all this intricate ceremony that Michael Branson talked of, this is all planned to the last detail. This sort of thing could be, I suppose, for any dignitary, but in this case it's for the most important dignitary of all ever, I would say, to be carried from a British plane on British soil. The awful homecoming of Diana, Princess of Wales, her coffin covered by the Royal Standard, now on its way across the tarmac towards the hearse.
And the coffin bearers just going out of sight of that camera, our other camera at the scene just picking them up now as they approach the hearse. Carried out in almost complete silence, just a light breeze rippling the flag there on the coffin.
Yes, I suppose if you were there you'd hear just that faint scraping of the boots across the tarmac. I don't think we hear much at all, apart from the distant hum of traffic reminding us that London is not far away. Busy world still going on somewhere.
There the party containing the Prime Minister. I didn't catch sight of the Prince of Wales there, Nick. I don't know if he's standing beside him. He is, I'm told he is.
He's there, something, yes. And so to the back of the hearse.
Ah, yes, there is Prince Charles, at the very far right of that group,
Yes.
standing beside one of Princess Diana's sisters.
Yes.
Mr. Blair, roughly in the middle.
The contrast could hardly be greater, could it, between this and the recent pictures that we've been seeing of the Princess and her various holidays, her various cruises, whatever the problems with the paparazzi and the press, and they started several weeks ago. There was a woman who seemed just to be having some fun and some enjoyment in life, and we have to contrast that now with these incredibly somber pictures, the silence of it, making it in a sense worse, I think.
Indeed. An unbelievable sight.
Some 19 hours now after the dreadful car accident in Paris, which claimed the life both of the Princess, her new friend Dodi Fayed, driver of the car. An accident being blamed by many people on the activities of paparazzi, unofficial cameramen, desperate for one picture which they can sell for so much money.
Clearly the events of last night are going to be gone over again and again and again until we get to the bottom of exactly what happened. But right now, our thoughts clearly with those people standing there, particularly the Prince of Wales, particularly the young princes.
Indeed, the young princes in Balmoral.
And we should perhaps mention there also the two sisters of the Princess of Wales, who we can also see in that lineup.
Yes.
It's Lady Jane Fellows and Sarah McCorquodale.
Sarah McCorquodale it was who first went out with the Prince of Wales and introduced him to the woman who was to be his bride. Marriage which, as we all know, lasted 15 years and ended in divorce. She'd just begun starting a new life, as far as we could tell, with Dodi Fayed. It did seem, whatever the
follow on in a grim cortege.
That is one of the royal cars, is it not, Nick?
Yes.
One of the fleet of royal cars,
Yep.
which shows that from the very beginning, from her return to this country, she's been treated as a member of the royal family.
Yes. Now, Nick, do we suspect that the Prince will actually stay at Northolt and fly on up now to Balmoral to be with his sons?
I presume so, Dermot. I have to say I can't quite see him in that group now, but whether he's moved slightly to one side...
He didn't seem to get into that
car, no.
With Diana's sisters.
The plan is for him to go straight back to Balmoral now to comfort his sons. William, 15, Harry, 12. Seeing their mother taken away and snatched away from them.
And where is that hearse heading?
We don't know, Dermot, we don't know. Private Moore clearing the way as if anybody would want to get in the way. Everybody in that group just peering out over the tarmac of the airport as they drive off somewhere into the British countryside.
We often wonder how people must be feeling, but I think we wouldn't be too far wide of the mark if we said they're clearly stunned.
There's the Prince of Wales. He's moving along, I think, the line, if I'm not much mistaken. Oh, no, is it him? Yes, I think he is. Talking to the people in the line, yes.
There he is, yes. Yes, he was just obscured there by one of the heads.
Yes. Wind.
That, I think, in the red cassock is probably one of the Queen's chaplains, is it not?
I would imagine, yes, probably. Afraid we can only see backs of heads, but it's a little difficult to identify. Now you can see the Prince of Wales there right in the middle of our shot. His face looking, you know, he's had a couple of weeks up in Balmoral. He's always relaxed holiday there. Things were going well for him as far as one could tell, and with his sons, and of course things were going well in her own terms with Diana, enjoying the holidays that Michael talked about. A lot of holidays lately. A lot of people will now say, well, she did deserve them.
But what dignity he's carrying out his duties with that prospect of going home now to talk to his sons, to comfort them, to offer them solace, to try to explain what's happened.
And there'll be a word of thanks there, I think, to the RAF. That's obviously the commanding officer, I would imagine, from Northolt. As Charles just stopping to have a word, yes. No doubt to say thank you for the dignified way in which that bringing forward of the coffin and transferring to the hearse was carried out.
Back to your precision, Michael, I made that 20 minutes exactly from landing to the hearse leaving the gates, and there the Prince of Wales walks away
back
onto
the plane,
which will head back to Aberdeen. Another word for an RAF man. Whether he will get straight on, or I imagine he will. There's no point hanging around, is there?
Back there,
no.
Then swiftly on to Balmoral. How long does it take to get from Aberdeen to Balmoral?
In that aircraft, about, I would think, I'm trying to work it out, about an hour and a half. I'd probably prove completely wrong by aeronautical experts, but I think it's about an hour and a half. It's quite a long way up to Aberdeen, you know. I went up there the other day. It's a long old haul. And from Aberdeen he will transfer to a car. He drove himself to the airport in Aberdeen this morning, with a police escort behind, of course, but drove himself down the twisting, winding road that goes through the village of Ballater, down Royal Deeside. Such a beautiful part of Scotland.
No, just the young pallbearers, the honour guard marching off.
I was struck by that news that he drove himself. It sometimes is therapy, isn't it, in cases like this, to do something.
Get on.
To feel that you're going, that he's going to Paris, that he's doing something.
Yes.
I imagine that was perhaps the thought. It would have been
yes.
easy enough for someone to drive him, but just that feeling in moments like this, I think people always want to say, I'm going to do something, I'll drive myself.
Indeed. So we shall shortly hear those jet engines start up again, and the plane will then turn to carry the Prince of Wales back to his beloved Balmoral, a place Diana never liked. She never enjoyed it up there in Scotland, I'm afraid. More to her taste, the Mediterranean sunshine. But they've had a lot of sun at Balmoral. I have to say, the weather when I was up there a couple of weeks ago was positively Mediterranean.
There's the whole door still open on the plane.
That dislike of Balmoral, Nick, part surely of what she referred to in the Panorama interview, wasn't it? That as far as the establishment was concerned, it struck home today, didn't it? The difficulties that there were. We've talked about the happiness, but the difficulties that there were, that she felt that the establishment never accepted her. Politicians somehow could get on with her, but there were grave difficulties with what she called the establishment and the courtiers.
And there we see Mr. Blair.
George Robertson.
George Robertson, the Defence Secretary, waiting for the departure of the Prince's flight back to Balmoral.
There will obviously be consultation between Number 10 and the Palace and many other people besides, starting already, I'm sure, tonight and above all tomorrow, about the steps forward now, and above all, of course, about the arrangements for the funerals and who will go, which politicians will be there. The leaders will obviously be there, but what does the Cabinet do? How does the Cabinet show it?
Out of Paris at high speed, chased by paparazzi photographers, inflicting appalling injuries from which she died at 4 this morning. Her friend Dodi Al-Fayed was also killed, as was their driver. Her bodyguard survived, but with serious injuries. Tonight, we try to piece together what happened. We reflect upon Diana herself, more icon than princess, as much doer as player, as much victim as victor. We examine how her death affects what happens now to the embattled family she leaves behind. We report to the tributes.
She was the people's princess,